Hello YouTube and hello conference report. So, sticking through a video, The God of the Glitches, and it made me think of lots of ontology, right, that's been produced in the past 30 or 40 years, right? Namely because what you identify as a glitch, right, and I really like that term, glitch. And you bring up the particle wave distinction with electrons, or there are other particles as well that you can do that with, I believe. Some people have brought up the uncertainty principle in this conversation. Some people have, like, free will and determinism, right? Free will and determinism is the example I'm going to use to try and illustrate this point. And the way in here is going to be Zizek, who I cite far too much, but I think that he's a great way into sort of contemporary discussions about all this stuff. Now, Zizek, or no, it's not free will and determinism for Zizek. It's like mind and brain, right? Can the mind be reduced to the brain, right? Like that concept, but it works perfectly well with free will and determinism as well. We have one model that we use in the first person, and we have a different model that we use in the third person. Now, it's typically seen as the positions about, let's say, free will and determinism are usually quite standard, right? You either have like an either or, right? I am a libertarian, or I am a determinist, right? Philosophical libertarian, by the way, not political. For anybody who's watching and doesn't know that distinction. So you have that either or you have some version of compatibilism, right? So which is trying to fit the two together to claim that they're not mutually exclusive. Zizek does this really, really interesting thing wherein he says, no, there is a contradiction. They are incompatible, but they're both true, right? And it's like a glitch, right? As you talk about it. But what's important is that he introduces this concept of parallax, right? He calls it the parallax view. And conference report, I'm sure you get that reference right away. But if anybody doesn't, parallax is like if you hold your finger out, you close one eye, and then you close another eye, your finger seems to shift, right? But it's the same finger. Point being is that you can look at the mind, and it's like closing one eye, and if you look at the brain, it's like closing another eye, right? And it's this shift that becomes central to Zizek. Now, we tend to take these kinds of moments, right, these kinds of glitches, as being signs of epistemic limitations, right? These are limits in our ability to describe the mind, or to describe free will, or to describe the activity of particles, or something like that. Zizek makes the really interesting claim that no. These are not epistemic limitations. What we're stumbling across are ontological facts, right? So the point is that that irreducible parallax gap between those two views, right, the difference between those two views, is not something that's a limitation on knowledge, but rather it's something that's part of reality in itself, right? So in some sense, reality is cracked, right? Reality is in itself riven with paradox, right? And then you can imagine how this sort of plays out. Now, the reason why I say this is a good way into thinking about these issues is because the first place that, well, you could find this kind of talk in Hegel, but really the first place this kind of talk takes root is in Derrida, with the concept of différance, right? The idea between différance is the difference between two things doesn't emerge from the existence of those two things, but rather the difference is what's primary. The difference is the first principle, not the two things that it separates. Now, Derrida, for Derrida, that was a linguistic point. Gilles Deleuze takes that, though, and makes it an ontological point. The first principle for Gilles Deleuze is multiplicity, right? We tend to think that if we think back far enough, everything will come down to a simple one, right? And that gives us a certain picture of the world. What Gilles Deleuze tries to do is, well, what picture of the world do we get if we think that instead of leading back to one, what if we say one comes later? And what we actually get back to is a multiplicity. And the differences, or the space between these objects, these primordial objects, is the real first principle, right? It's a very different picture of reality. It's a very different model of reality. It's a really cool model of reality too, because what that, and you can work out all the steps that you can get here, right? But you end up with, for instance, the possibility of radical novelty, right? Something radically new can appear. Stuff like that, right? It's not just this ever-building network of emergent complexity at this point. New things can actually come into existence, right? Which I think is just a really cool idea. Quentin Meillassoux and the speculative realists, who Kyle Ravelli is kind of a partisan of, and I didn't know about them. He sent me an essay by Meillassoux, and I've been playing with his ideas lately. Meillassoux goes further than this, and he suggests that the moment of radical novelty, the miracle, if you like, he reappropriates the miracle through these kinds of ontological channels, right? And he says that the miracle is not the sign of the existence of a god, but rather it's a sign of his non-existence. It's a really, really, again, just cool thought. So yeah, I just wanted to point to all these places in the past, well, probably since the 60s, maybe even 50s, where this idea of glitches takes on an ontological, even primordial value. And in that larger conversation about different pictures of the world, you can arrive at some dramatically different conclusions about our world. Now, that being said, should also be said, that whole discussion should be bracketed to say that that's all under the sign of, like, for Deleuze, who is one philosopher who I mentioned, the purpose of philosophy is not to come to the answer, right? The purpose is to provide different frameworks through which we can look at the world and through which we can look at problems, right? So, so for Deleuze, there really isn't one picture of the world, as there is not for me, right? I think it's a naive perspective, a naive point of view. And Deleuze kind of suggests, okay, if there isn't one picture of the world, then the job of the philosopher is to produce new pictures of the world, right? Um, so yeah, that's that's it's important to bracket off what the intent of such kind of talk is. So yeah, there's just a scattershot of stuff that I've been thinking about lately that has to do with this idea of glitches, as you put it. And yeah, have a good day.